Is this the new way of the world of whiskey investing? Is this going to be something that's in that realm of NFTs and the metaverse and stuff like that? Is that what's happening
Well,
here?
it's definitely an interesting turn of events, right? Because, we've seen whiskey cryptocurrencies, whiskey-backed cryptocurrencies that kind of started coming out. There are two of them that are in ICO, which is initial coin offering stages right now. And those were supposed to be backed by, one was backed by barrels and one was backed by bottles.
Okay.
But now we're starting to see the NFTs, which are, similar but different. So an NFT is a non-fungible token, and it represents ownership of a rare item. And so there's another company here in the United States called Striped Pig Distillery, and they are offering NFTs for a bottle from their first barrel of whiskey, which they believe is the first barrel of whiskey to be distilled in the state of South Carolina since Prohibition. And so, it's something that shows ownership of a rare, unique item. And, they've gotten some artists involved, and they've got artwork associated with this, and it's very interesting. It's kind of something that would make a traditional investor balk. I always like to tell people caveat emptor, buyer beware. But also, fortune favors the bold. There are a lot of people who bought into Bitcoin early on and ended up making millions of dollars just because they held on to it for a long time. The HODL gang, if you will. So it's interesting, and we mentioned earlier the .com craze. Tulip bulbs. So there are all kinds of different things that people can get interested in that can suddenly, go up in value. And if that is something, if you have a risk tolerance where you can dump some money into this just to see what happens, I would always caution people, it's like playing poker. You don't want to play with money that you can't afford to lose. But if this is something where, and a lot of these, you have to be an accredited investor, which means that you have to be registered with the SEC. You have to have a certain amount of money in investments and a certain history of investing and all that sort of thing. And so it's not necessarily open to everybody. But it's interesting for the people who, those people who would pay $4,000 for a bottle of Pappy in a liquor store in New York. This is something where they'll go, hey, I'll buy an NFT for a rare bottle of whiskey, or, I'll enter into an initial coin offering of, something that is backed by whiskey casks. Sure, I just want to see what happens, and maybe I'll get rich, maybe I'll lose all the money, but there's always that kind of thrill of what if.
You actually touched on something very interesting there. I think you mentioned previously about casks being purchased and bottles being purchased.
Sure.
Can you run me through the difference on that, on this initial coin offering on the casks?
So one of them is, and I made myself some notes here. So whiskey coin is in the ICO stage, and it's a legally compliant coin, and I believe that one is based on bottle ownership. I'm not 100% sure because they started back in like 2018, 2019, and they're kind of like stuck in that stage because I think they did some restructuring and they may have changed that part of it. And then cask coin is the one that is based on casks of Scotch whiskey. They are also in the ICO stage. And they are also restructuring to comply with U.S. regulations, because a lot of people think, cryptocurrency, there are no rules, anybody can buy it and whatever. And that's not necessarily the case. The main thing there is the IRS sees that as property. And when your property goes up in value and you sell it and you make money, you have to pay capital gains taxes on that. That's the big one. But there are other regulations that you have to be compliant with if you're gonna purchase something like this.
Absolutely. And you really raise a good point there, because I know that if you walk into Hong Kong, if you go through the airport and you have more than 3 bottles and they catch you, you can be charged for importing those bottles.
Oh, wow.
And before I go any further, I do want to mention something that is interesting here. Robin, congratulations on your 60-year Glen Grant that is going on right now. You have a 60-year in the market. And it is going right up our alley of this conversation because it is selling for 30,000. Am I correct in
The
saying that?
retail is 30,000 US. And in the United States, I think it was only about 20 or so bottles that came to the US. So
Wow.
it's in that category of being very old and very, very collectible. But it's not just a 60 years old, actually an anniversary bottling
Okay.
for our master distiller, Dennis Malcolm,
Oh,
who
wow.
is
A lot of meaning there. Wow.
yeah, on April the 21st this year marked
Mhm.
his 60 years since he started back in
Wow.
1961 at the age of 15. I mean, he was a
Wow.
cooper.
Kidding me.
You know, I think that's a fantastic story.
Well, that's what I was kind of getting to here is the fact that you've got a 60-year for 30,000 US. Obviously, there is a target demographic that can afford that bottle. Having said that, that is still relative to market, probably undervalued, if I'm
Yeah,
being totally fair, right? So,
absolutely, Nate.
two sides to the coin there, right?
I mean, the thing is about the Glen Grant is that it's one of Spaceside's great distilleries. I'm plugging my brand a little bit here, but people look for authenticity. They look for a great story, and I think they also look for the quality and the craftsmanship as well. So, if you think about some of the prices, for some of the the brands that you've been mentioning, Nate, I mean, there are some great, investment opportunities out there that, maybe not be, turning, in a matter of days, months, 500%, returns, but maybe a little bit longer term. I think there's still investors, who are looking for those opportunities too.
I actually brought up your brand specifically, not for the plug, funny enough, but because of the fact that it is one of the oldest whiskeys in the market for an extremely reasonable price relative to everything else. So it's kind of got that balance of both. While it does take a hell of a restaurant to be able to buy a $30,000 bottle, it's not impossible. It's absolutely not impossible. There is somebody out there that is going to drink that whiskey. I mean, did you hear about the story of the gentleman at the St. Moritz Hotel in Switzerland, and he went and bought that Macallan for 1 ounce for 10,000 euro, and then he goes home to Hong Kong, and it makes news in Switzerland, and an archivist of whiskey gets a hold of the article and says, wow, that's really interesting. Macallan never made that bottle that year, and it turns out to be a complete fake. And the long story short is the manager of the St. Moritz flies to Hong Kong, returns the man his money, rightfully so. But at what point does it get to, okay, well, this was 10,000 euro for a 1 ounce pour. How many people can afford a 10,000 euro pour, right? Like it's crazy.
Well, I think that's the big risk about this entire business, is that the prices are so high, and inevitably the crooks are going to follow. In fact, I mean, there has been criminals have been involved in counterfeiting precious whiskey before. I mean, I think we all heard about that Italian gang that were had been falsifying very rare bottles of Macallan.
Well, I think that's where the NFT kind of circles up here and kind of brings it all legal and whole, right? That's where I can see it being sort of a win to do this, because everything is tracked. It's tracked right down to the last seller, the last buyer. It's in a place that's known to house the best of the best, goods. So maybe that's the way to do it moving forward, right? I mean, if there's this actual tracker on everything and it's through the blockchain, maybe that's the only way forward in something like
I mean,
this.
it really depends. You still have to have that provenance, though, right? Because, what's to say that I can't walk into that place and, with a fake bottle stuffed in my coat and, oh, what's that over there, and switch the bottles. I mean, I would hope that there is that level of security, but I would hate to see someone place that level of trust in the blockchain just because there is a record, the record itself cannot be tampered with, but that doesn't mean that what the record is representing cannot be tampered with. And we've already seen instances of NFT counterfeiting.
What's going on in the cask game right now? Bardstown has got 300,000 plus casks over there for 155 different companies maturing. Like, what is going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, so like really, if you want to be in the whiskey business, be in the whiskey business. One of the really interesting things that Chuck Cowdery brought up recently was, this is again nothing new, because there was a practice 100 or so years ago called buying and selling warehouse receipts. So you would have a receipt for a cask in a warehouse and say, like, I'm a distillery owner and I need to borrow some money to build a rick house. So I would take a stack of these warehouse receipts down to the bank and use that as collateral to get a loan to buy my, to build my warehouse or whatever. Or, if somebody wanted to invest in my company, I could sell them, okay, I'll sell you barrels 101 to 109 or whatever. So this is nothing new. There are a lot of new ways to go about it. There are lots of people who are contract distilling to start their own brands. Some of those people will go on to build distilleries. Some of them will just, it might be a one-off, or it might be, I only want to contract distill. There are a lot of folks who are going that route. But then you get into companies that are actually, selling shares of these barrels. So, if you say, like, I don't want to be tied to this specific barrel, I just want to own some of these, percentage of these barrels, that is something else that you can do right now. And, it seems like it's pretty stable right now. And again, I'm glad that you had your disclaimer at the beginning of this, that this is for entertainment purposes only. I am a writer. Do not take investment advice from me. I'm what you call poor, so that it will not work out for you.
Me too, Maggie.
Actually, so that actually brings up an interesting point. I mean, Maggie, I have so much respect for people that drink the whiskey. I have much more respect for people that drink the whiskey than people like myself that hold it, if I'm being totally transparent. Having said that, do you guys see an end in sight to the values being determined on these bottles right now?
If you look at the sort of global, through this through the global lens, you've got China, you've got India, you've got Brazil, all the BRIC countries. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and they're now beginning to get a taste for it. And I mean, they've already got a taste for it, of course. But I think that, I think this is going to keep going for a while. But I think it's going to start to spill over into other aged liquids, such as, I think, rum.
Rum is
an opportunity for rum, and 100%. Of course cognac. And maybe beyond that, but I think that it will. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, and when there's uncertainty, people want to invest in tangible assets. And now we've seen that whiskey has become a tangible asset. I only think it's going to get stronger.
So with the emerging markets and the popularity of bourbon, but also with the economic uncertainty that's going on in the world, beverage alcohol is pretty much a constant. And that's something that's really unique from an economic standpoint.
Very
and
well
so, when you have that in conjunction with, emerging middle classes around the world with disposable income where there have never been before, there are a lot of opportunities to grow beverage alcohol globally. But then also, whether the economy is up or down, beverage alcohol just keeps chugging right along.
But Maggie, I mean, we did see in 2008, 2009, when we saw that last economic depression, and so we saw a big sort of dip in the sort of luxury brand sales. So yeah, it can work both ways. But I think what we're talking about is the very sort of high-end collectible, maybe the ones that survive through thick and thin, boom and bust.